Welcome to the show. On this episode, we'll be speaking with Jessica Ash. She's a functional clinical nutritionist who specializes in hormonal imbalances and PCOS. We'll get into the importance of minerals when balancing hormones, diet, and why we need to focus more on progesterone. We'll talk about endometriosis and tons more. So this is a great episode. Stay tuned. Have you ever thought about making your own podcast? I'm sure you have great ideas, but you just don't know where to begin. Well, here's where Anchor is going to be a lifesaver. It's a one-stop shop for creating and distributing any podcast. Best of all, it's 100% free. They have creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor then quickly distributes your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and so much more, just with one click. You can make money from your podcast right away with no minimum listenership. That means easy access to sponsors. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So why don't you check out Anchor today? Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Welcome to the Katka TV podcast, your source for all things health, happiness, and beauty. Hey, Jessica, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Kat.
I have yet to meet someone in this space that doesn't have a deeply personal reason for being here. So could you take us back to your own health journey, what you were dealing with, and how long did it take for you to figure it out?
Yeah, my story started when I started my period. So from the beginning, I really had hormonal issues, but I thought that was normal, as most of us do, just because a lot of period symptoms and PMS symptoms and heavy cycles, clotty cycles are deemed normal by our society. Even though they're common, now I know that they're not normal. But as a young girl, I did not know that. And so as I went up through my teen years and into my early 20s, I really got very, very ill and very, very sick, to a point where I actually became pretty much bedridden. And I went to many doctors, and of course I got that similar phrase that we all get: your tests are normal, but here's some birth control. And so I was on birth control from 16 to 18, and I knew something was not right. I did not feel right mentally while I was on it, and so I just decided to go off. I knew nothing about it. I didn't know that it shut down my cycles. I knew nothing. And so when I ended up going off of birth control, my late teens, early 20s was really where the roller coaster started. And I saw about a dozen doctors before I finally received a diagnosis of polycystic ovarian syndrome, lupus, Hashimoto's, and celiac disease, which really helped me validate that there was something wrong and motivated me to really start fixing it. I had already been gluten-free for a couple of years, and so then I discovered a more paleo style of eating, and it kind of has evolved and grown over the course of the years, but nutrition really was my foundation, and I was passionate about hormones ever since my diagnosis, and I kind of naturally fell into the work of helping other women. They always asked, what did you do? What is different? You look so healthy, or you look like you're feeling better than ever. And I naturally just kind of fell into the work, and I thought, what, maybe I should actually go back to school for this. So I did, and that's kind of how my career was born.
Could you tell us all about your credentials and what you studied and where you studied to learn about hormones?
Yeah, so when it comes to hormones, most of my studies are actually done on my own. I spend about 20 hours a week researching new studies, studying endocrinology, taking continuing education. A lot of people ask me that question, like, where do you learn about hormones? What school can I go to? And no school is going to really teach you everything that you need to know. You need to kind of understand physiology and then go from there. And so I did become a clinical nutritionist, just kind of a regular traditional, conventional training that didn't really teach me much except for what is commonly taught to nutritionists. And then I became a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. I'm a holistic health coach through the Institute of Integrative Nutrition, and I was a certified personal trainer before all of that happened. And those were all me going back to school and getting educated. I had already gone through and got a bachelor's of science in business, and then with an emphasis, like I really did enjoy nutrition even then, so I did take quite a few nutrition and physiology classes, but I wanted that business degree. So really a lot of my understanding of hormones just continues to grow with my continued research. I am really interested in it. It's something that I'm really passionate about and I'm hungry to constantly learn about. And so I do spend a lot of time honing my skills and clinical trainings.
So I think that was a great point that you mentioned, that your standard, like say nutritionist or a doctor, is not going to have like that type of focus on hormones, that it really is something where you have to like seek it out. And
yes,
that's kind of the problem with the medical system now, because unless the doctor is motivated to do that, there's going to be a disconnect in how they can help you.
Right. And I always kind of compare it to if you were going to go to a lawyer, let's say, do you want a lawyer that just kind of says like, I dabble in everything, I'm really good at all of it? Or do you want someone that says like, I spend all my time researching this one area and I can make sure that you are covered in every area because I know everything about this one subject, you know? And it just kind of, for me, like I find that when you specialize in something and you focus on something, it just allows you to help people that much more rather than just kind of dabbling a little bit here and there.
So let's talk a little bit about diet, because you mentioned that you had tried paleo in the beginning. What's the key to a healthy diet? Do we all need to buy like a $400 blender to achieve health? What's the secret?
The secret is to stop paying attention to all the BS out there and trust your body. I think a lot of people are just so confused about what to eat because of the information overload that they forget that our body was programmed to eat very specific things and derive nutrients from an abundance of foods. We can eat many foods, but what does the body prefer to eat? How do certain foods affect us on our physiological level? And that is what really functional nutrition is all about. What foods are going to be the most functional for the goal that you're trying to achieve? And so specifically, you know, I kind of have gone through like a Morpheus of paleo, but then I've honed that into more pro-metabolic eating. So I focus my clients on very specific foods. I work mostly with women who have PCOS, hypothyroidism, various hormonal imbalances, endometriosis. And so all of those issues are usually driven by excessive inflammation in the gut. So I'm always looking for very gut supportive. I'm also looking to optimize detoxification. And so really that's going to look like very nutrient dense foods that are very, very rich in nutrients. And they're going to be very whole foods in the sense of it doesn't, you know, come in a package and say paleo, gluten-free, dairy-free, because that was manufactured in a factory. So I am very much like, take it back to the base. We do lots of carbohydrates from roots and fruits just because they're very easy to digest and absorb energy from. I am an encourager of bioavailable animal proteins. So making sure that your protein is absolutely absorbable, because specifically with women with PCOS, protein is so incredibly important for blood sugar balance, and many women are protein deficient. And then I am always about those high quality fats. And when you get those in balance and you avoid the foods that really irritate or rough up the gut, a lot of times you'll find a lot of healing can take place quite quickly.
Could you give us an example of what you would eat on a typical healthy day? Any go-to favorite meals?
Yeah. So I keep things very simple but delicious, things that I truly enjoy, truly crave. And that's important. Like I'm always, I understand that my body has innate wisdom and I follow it kind of like a compass. But most mornings I'm going to wake up and eat pasture raised eggs cooked in a little bit of grass-fed butter or ghee. The ghee has lots of vitamin K in it and those good saturated fats for liver health. And then the eggs are going to be very rich in choline and B vitamins. That yolk is kind of like a multivitamin. I usually pair all protein with carbohydrate so it doesn't drop my blood sugar too low. And morning is going to look a lot like fruit. I'm a lot of times pairing it with fruit or maybe a high quality gluten-free sourdough if I made it that week. And then about 3 hours later, I'm going to eat again for blood sugar balance to make sure I can manually balance blood sugar to keep testosterone down and progesterone up. And that's going to look usually like some type of carrot dish because of raw carrot fiber a day keeps the estrogen away. And so I usually will do a little raw carrot salad. It's just a shredded carrot, some MCT oil or melted coconut oil or olive oil, some vinegar and some sea salt. And then I'll usually pair that with a little bit of protein. And that's going to look like a good high quality aged raw cheese, mostly for the vitamin K, again, to keep testosterone down, but also for it's actually very rich in protein and calcium, which actually is incredible for gut health. And then lunch is going to look usually like I usually do like shellfish or whitefish for all those trace minerals and iodine and zinc. And usually I'll just fry it up in a pan really quick with some butter and squeeze some lemon juice on it and either pair it with some fruit. Sometimes I'll actually have some Jello that I made with grass-fed gelatin and like grape juice or orange juice or coconut water. Or I'll do some potatoes. I really love some high quality root vegetables. Then I usually do a mid-afternoon snack with some coffee to just kind of do a mid-afternoon pick-me-up. And then dinner is going to look a lot like some steak, some potatoes, and a little bit of fruit to help me absorb the glucose from my potatoes well. So I usually have 2 snacks and 3 meals a day, and it's going to be mostly roots and fruits and protein.
Okay, that actually sounds really delicious. So I'm going to try some of those recipes.
Easy, quick, to the point, but also it never gets old for me.
You mentioned coffee. So is coffee okay to have if you have PCOS?
Well, a lot of people are afraid of coffee because there's a lot of fear mongers out there. And what we have to understand is everything in context. So, yes, coffee is horrible for you if you're waking up and drinking it on an empty stomach with almond milk and no sugar in it, because it's going to spike blood sugar. And then it's actually going to spike cortisol, which then will spike blood sugar. So that's how it kind of works. Stress hormones will raise, and then it will force the body to create its own sugar. And so what we do is we just need to eat breakfast beforehand, and we always need to make sure we add at least a little bit of high quality saturated fats and some source of fructose or glucose to that coffee. And that takes all the negative effects away, all the jitteriness, all the anxiety. And coffee is such a rich source of polyphenols. It's also very rich in B vitamins and a lot of trace minerals, actually. So magnesium, calcium, which are so important for the body. And then also keep in mind, it's great for liver health. So it's all about how we consume it. It's all about how we look at food. We want to make sure it's functional and supporting our function. So we don't want to use caffeine as a drug. We want to use it as a supplement, and doing it after meals with a good amount of carbohydrate and fat will do that for us.
Okay, so we can have coffee again. That's great.
And everyone's a little different, obviously. It's always in context. So some people are really, their adrenals are really off. They're just in a very high stress state. And so coffee does tend to affect them awfully. But usually with the addition of it after a meal and adding the right things to it, it doesn't tend to affect them anymore and tends to benefit them and support the metabolism.
Yeah, personally, I noticed I can't have coffee right before my period because I'll get a little more anxiety. But if I have it any other time, it's generally fine.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy how our hormones totally affect that?
Yes. So you also stress the importance of minerals when it comes to balancing our hormones. So
Yes.
how important are minerals to hormonal balance?
Minerals are everything to hormonal balance because the cell itself is the one that's making hormones and receiving hormones. And so we have to keep in mind that cells really heavily rely on a proper balance of minerals to function properly. And many of the things, let's just say women with PCOS are struggling with, have to do a lot with mineral imbalances or even vitamin deficiencies. And we tend to blame the foods and I don't mean blame the body, but also acknowledge that there maybe could be some really deep imbalances within the body that could be be affecting how we react to foods and affecting how we react to our environment. So, for example, some of the most important minerals would be magnesium. Magnesium is the most abundant mineral in the body, and it's the most important mineral in the body. It's responsible for over 400 enzymatic reactions. And we need it to respond to blood glucose and insulin properly. And without magnesium or deficiency of magnesium, we will have a problem with blood sugar control. And so magnesium is absolutely essential. So many people are deficient in it nowadays, and I would say is the most important mineral. And then we have calcium and sodium and potassium, all incredibly important minerals that tend to be imbalanced or deficient. Many women with PCOS have calcium that's having a hard time getting into the bones and the teeth. So they need vitamin K to get it into the bones and the teeth. And many women with PCOS and other hormonal imbalances are deficient in vitamin K. And so there are lots of trace minerals like copper and zinc and iodine that all play an essential role in ovarian health and thyroid health and adrenal health. And a deficiency in these minerals can actually affect how the cell begins to communicate with each other. And that's what hormones are. They're chemical messengers from cell to cell.
I really don't like for women to be on hormonal birth control just because we know that it can cause a lot of side effects and mineral and all these depletions in our bodies. But let's say a woman has to be on hormonal birth control or some sort of birth control. What would you recommend is the safest option?
Yeah, so usually I know a lot of women are not necessarily comfortable with the fertility awareness method, or they're not quite in sync with their natural cycles yet, which is what I usually recommend. We can practice birth control without being on a contraceptive. We are practicing contraception when we understand that we only have a certain time during the month where we can get pregnant. But for women who are maybe not comfortable with that yet, or for whatever reason it's not enough for them, I think, honestly, there's not really an amazing form of birth control. Unfortunately, cutting off our ability to reproduce usually does come up with some type of consequence. But in my opinion and in my observation, the copper IUD does tend to be the least invasive. And it's because it's a non-hormonal form. However, it can still mess with mineral levels like we just talked about. Copper is a mineral, so it is important to take some precautions to keep minerals in balance and just kind of keep an eye on copper levels while we're using the copper IUD.
I noticed that you ask your clients about their pulse and temperature. What information does this give you about their health?
Yeah, so healthy, optimal bodies tend to run hot. They tend to have an optimal temperature of around 98.6, at least at the peak of the afternoon, and pulses that are a little bit higher, between 75 and 85, to make sure the nutrients and the oxygen are getting to where they need to go quickly. That's how our body kind of transfers nutrients through the bloodstream to the cells. And many people that are struggling hormonally, struggling with autoimmune disease, struggling with PCOS, don't even recognize that their body temperature is so low. And body temperature can play a role in our susceptibility to things like viruses and bacteria. It can affect our digestion. It can affect our detoxification. And so when I tell my clients to eat for heat, we are always working towards eating for our metabolism, eating foods that are pro-metabolic, doing habits that are pro-metabolic. Our goal is to get those body temperatures and pulses optimal. And that's actually how I do my work. How do we know that exercise is working for us? How do we know that a food is working for us? Yeah, over time we might feel better, or we might feel worse, or we might start to realize like, I don't know if that food works for me very well. But when you use temps and pulses, you know right away. You know if that's working for you or against your goals.
So just to clarify, so you're saying you eat a food and then you check your temperature and your pulse, and that can tell you?
Yeah, usually around 30 to 40 minutes after, you want to see that meal raised your temperature a little bit. You ate for heat and it raised your pulse a little bit. Our goal is to be in that optimal zone of 75 to 85 for pulses and get up towards 97.8 around 1 to 3 p.m.
So when you say eating for heat, eating for like metabolic, so you
function,
mean
yes.
foods that are warming. What are some examples?
Yeah, so foods that are warming are going to be very different for each person, but it's not necessarily about foods that are warming, but foods that are supporting your metabolic function, foods that your body can easily take and convert into energy, if that makes sense. Because usually women who are struggling hormonally, their cells are actually starving for energy. A lot of people think if they're overweight, they're, oh, I have too much energy in my body. But in reality, many times the body's storing that energy instead of utilizing that energy, which is why they're lethargic after meals, why they're tired, why they're waking up exhausted, why they're not sleeping well. They need more energy. So I want to make sure that the food someone is eating is providing the energy that they need. It's easily digested, it's easily assimilated, and it's easily providing fuel for them. And it's usually more about the combinations of foods, the types of foods. So for example, people are like, well, I get protein and carb at every meal. But where do you get your protein from? Where do you get your carbohydrates from? Where do you get your fats from? And how are they supporting your metabolism? Are they being easily used and assimilated for fuel for the cell? And that's what your temps and pulses will tell you. It's not necessarily like the more warming the foods, but is your body taking that food and easily able to turn it into fuel?
Most of my audience has PCOS, estrogen
Okay.
dominance, endometriosis, or some other combination of hormonal imbalances. Could you go
Right.
into how you would approach figuring out the root cause of different hormonal imbalances?
Yeah, so when it comes to root cause, I think a lot of people are kind of, and I don't want to say obsessed with the root cause, but more just like so preoccupied with the root cause that they forget that finding the root cause is not necessarily going to get you out of the situation. Usually the root cause is very simple. The foundations are missing. So the food that they're eating is not working for them. Many people that come to me have already worked with 3, 4 practitioners. They're on gluten-free diets. They're on dairy-free diets. They've done elimination diets. So I get definitely the more hard cases, the more difficult cases. And when it comes to these people, you would look at them and you'd think like they're already doing everything quote unquote right. They're eating clean, they're doing this, they're doing that. And I am more about let's look at your physiology. What do your cells need? Your cells need blood sugar balance. Your cells need cortisol and adrenaline to be down. And so anyone that has endometriosis or PCOS, they're going to have progesterone deficiency so often. That is what I see. And so many of them have estrogen dominance or a hard time detoxifying estrogen. So their estrogen levels might be normal, but their metabolizing of estrogen is very, very poor. And so I'm always focusing on cellular health, metabolic health, because that's the only thing that is going to get them to where they want to go. So we always start with a blood sugar balancing and a blood sugar supportive nutrition plan, meaning that I have them eat protein, carb, and fat every 3 hours to keep cortisol and adrenaline down. And keeping their stress down allows their thyroid function to go up, allows that body temperature to go up, allows them to respond to progesterone better and detoxify better. And then usually, honestly, that's usually enough to get them feeling 70% better. And then we focus on things like sleep and proper spectrums of light, like red light. We focus on mineral balancing. I usually run a hair tissue mineral analysis to see where their minerals are at, because usually people who are struggling are deficient in things like magnesium or copper, or they're struggling with their trace minerals. So I'm always focusing on nutrition. I'm always focusing on lifestyle. So are you getting enough sunlight? Are you getting enough rest? Are you getting enough exercise? And I'm always focusing on minerals and properly supportive supplementation. And that's going to look very different for every single woman who has hormonal imbalances. So no two women are exactly alike in what they need.
So you mentioned eating every 3 hours. So does that
Yes.
mean for PCOS and hormonal problems, intermittent fasting is probably not the best idea?
Correct. Usually during fasting, what we find is women's, and really anyone's, liver tends to enlarge, because what needs to happen is our cells still run on glucose even when we're fasting. And so if we're not eating fuel, we are making it. And how we make it is by raising cortisol and adrenaline to break down our muscle tissue, our tendon tissue, anything that's made up of amino acids, send those to the liver, and the liver performs gluconeogenesis and turns those amino acids into sugar to keep our blood sugar balanced. This is why many women with PCOS have actually found that they tend to have higher fasting blood glucose when they're fasting because they're making sugar. Just because they're not eating it doesn't mean you're not running off of it. And so, in my opinion, intermittent fasting tends to actually make things worse because cortisol and stress hormones like prolactin and adrenaline are some main driving hormones in conditions like polycystic ovarian syndrome.
So why do we need to focus so much on progesterone?
Progesterone is this amazing hormone, and a lot of women ask their doctors, I want to check my progesterone. And so many doctors, I've heard stories and reports say, oh, that's only an important hormone if you want to get pregnant. Or they get like, it's only an important hormone if you want to thin your uterine lining. They get very weird answers. And I think a lot of doctors and people just don't understand the importance of this amazing hormone. But progesterone is a hormone that we actually make once we ovulate. And once we empty our egg sac, that empty egg sac becomes a gland called the corpus luteum. And the corpus luteum produces us a hormone called progesterone for about 11 to 14 days in a really healthy body. And during that luteal phase, we have this flood of an anti-inflammatory, pro-sleep, anti-anxiety, anti-androgenic, pro-longevity, pro-vitality hormone that really encourages proper thyroid function. This is why our temperatures go up during this time. That's why we get a little bit hungrier. We tend to have much more blood sugar imbalance symptoms because we need more fuel, we need more energy. And progesterone is just this wonderful pro-metabolic hormone. And unfortunately, many women with hormonal imbalances, sleep disturbances, anxiety, especially women with PCOS and endometriosis, are incredibly deficient in this hormone.
Do you recommend those wild yam creams or anything else to raise our progesterone levels?
In context, I think they can be supportive. I think bioidentical progesterone can be supportive for many women with hormonal imbalances. However, it needs to be understood before supplementing with it. I think some women supplement with it just thinking it's going to fix all their problems, and then they tend to get worse symptoms instead of better symptoms or symptom improvement. And so it's very important to understand that progesterone is going to increase the metabolism. But if you are not eating for a healthy metabolism, you're not fueling your cells well, you might get adverse reactions. So progesterone works really well in conjunction with a blood sugar supportive diet or a pro-metabolic style of eating like we just talked about.
And what are your thoughts on maca as a supplement for hormonal balance?
So maca is a cruciferous vegetable. It's important to understand it's a cruciferous root, so it can be goitrogenic when consumed raw. Traditionally, they used to prepare it by boiling it, and that was the proper traditional way to prepare it. And now many companies are saying, raw maca is incredible for you, and really the gelatinized version or the boiled version tends to be the most potent. Raw maca can be pretty anti-thyroid.
And do you find that it helps with any sort of hormonal imbalance?
Sometimes it does, and sometimes it does nothing. I think it really just depends on the person, honestly. And that goes for a lot of different herbs and compounds. People are so vastly different in what they're struggling with that for every one person that says, maca saved my life, there's 10 people that said it didn't do anything for me. So I think it really just depends on the person, but there are a lot of people that really like maca. Me personally, I didn't really see any difference from it. And so I decided to spend my money elsewhere and focus on other things, but there are many women that do see a lot of benefit from it.
Why does thyroid health matter, and what role does it play in our metabolism?
It plays every role. And the reason for that is it's actually pretty funny because the scientific community used to refer to the thyroid as the third ovary. And The thyroid is much, much misunderstood right now just because TSH is usually the only marker that doctors use to check for thyroid function. Funny enough, the pituitary gland is what makes TSH to talk to the thyroid, but it's not a good gauge for overall thyroid health. Active thyroid hormone is measured with free T3. You can see if your free T3 is being converted into an inactive form by checking reverse T3. You need to make sure you're checking thyroid antibodies to make sure there's no thyroid inflammation. So it's very important to realize that the thyroid can play a huge, huge role in our hormonal function. And many times it's just going unchecked because doctors are only checking TSH. And thyroid hormone is really going to affect how every single cell functions. Every single cell needs free T3 to function properly, to retain magnesium within the cell, to keep proper mineral balance, to receive glucose properly, to receive insulin properly, to detoxify estrogen. Your liver needs T3. Your gut needs T3 to have proper transit time and proper gallbladder secretion and proper digestive enzyme function and proper hydrochloric acid secretion. So it's just very important to understand it's needed by every single cell. And if we're deficient in it, every single cell is going to be working on a very, very slow time clock, really. Everything's going to be in slow motion.
What kind of testing do you do with your clients to find out how their thyroid's working?
So usually if temps and pulses are really, really low, it's a good indicator that there is some type of hypothyroidism at play there. So a full thyroid panel that includes free T3, reverse T3, antibodies is very, very helpful. There are many doctors that are resistant to giving people those tests. So it just really depends on if they can get that test or not. However, either way, the treatment is the same. You've got to support the liver and the gut, and you've got to eat for a healthy metabolism. So regardless of if you have that test in front of you or not, you can really gauge if what you're doing is working for your temps and pulses. And then for other testing, things like a hair tissue mineral analysis, you can really see if the cell is receiving thyroid hormone well simply by checking their minerals. For example, if someone has low magnesium or elevated calcium, they're not going to respond to thyroid hormone very well. If they're deficient in potassium, they're not going to respond to thyroid hormone very well. So minerals can also be a great indicator. Some people have very normal thyroid labs, but they still have a lot of hypothyroid symptoms. And that's very common for women with PCOS. And so minerals are kind of where it's at. And then you can always look at their Dutch test or their hormone test to see how they're metabolizing cortisol. Usually if you have a problem with metabolizing cortisol or there's imbalance there, then that could be an indicator that there's some thyroid issues going on. So there's a lot of clues if you can't get a full thyroid panel run.
Let's say your cortisol level on your Dutch test came back good, but your DHEA levels are really high, and that seems to be driving your PCOS symptoms.
Yes. Same. It should be kind of treated the same because DHEA is a hormone made by the adrenal gland. So there's some type of adrenal upset. And DHEA down the line can turn into both testosterone and estrogen. And so when someone has elevated DHEA, the first thing I'm looking at is where is the stress coming from? Why is the body responding with so much DHEA? And we have to keep in mind that DHEA is actually quite protective. So sometimes there are hormones that are high that are causing symptoms that we seem to perceive as bad. However, it's actually our body protecting us. And those symptoms are just a kind of a naughty side effect of that. So we really want to acknowledge why is this DHEA high and not say, how can I get this DHEA down? That's not the right question. It's why is it high in the first place? And so many times it's women are really stuck on all their restrictive diets that they're really forgetting to just nourish themselves and flood their body with nutrition and nutrients and manually keep their blood sugar stable. And usually hyper focusing on blood sugar balance for 6 to 8 weeks usually will bring DHEA levels down tremendously. And then further supporting the adrenal glands with the nutrients they need, like magnesium and potassium and sodium, and helping calcium get to where it needs to go with vitamin K and vitamin C and B vitamins will all really help support the adrenals to pump out the proper amount of hormones, because the adrenals are responsible for so many different hormone secretions. They produce so many different types of steroids. And so it's very important to know that when one is off, there's most likely another off. It's just figuring out which one.
Let's talk about endometriosis. Many of my audience members have endometriosis, and they're all kind of told the same thing, to remove like the uterus and ovaries and everything like that, and that's going to fix it. So can you tell us how you would approach a client with endometriosis differently?
Yeah, so a lot of the research and many studies point to endometriosis being partially driven, not wholly driven, but partially driven by the inability to break down estrogen properly. So many endometriosis clients have blatant, downright high estrogen dominance, your classic case. But there are a lot of people with endometriosis that do not have high estrogen. However, they are not breaking it down well, either in the liver or the gut. And keep in mind, the bacteria in the gut create a toxin called endotoxin. Endotoxin, endometriosis, we need to see the connection there. And a lot of times the estrogen breakdown process is being impaired in the gut when it comes to a woman with endometriosis. So I highly, highly place a lot of focus on gut health and getting estrogen detoxification optimized out of the gut. Making sure someone with endometriosis is not constipated is a really simple tool, but very effective. Eating a raw carrot every single day to bind to estrogen in the gut is really amazing. And then overall just supporting bacterial balance in the gut. So spore-based probiotics can be helpful, but focusing on the liver and the gut and the detoxification of estrogen can be very, very powerful. And then if someone with endometriosis is deficient in progesterone, that is a route that I encourage them to take with their doctor, is looking into bioidentical progesterone.
So I love this older tip that you gave about waking up to the sound of the radio rather than an alarm clock. So why is this a better option for our adrenals? And do you have any other tips like this to lower stress?
Yeah. So we have to kind of keep in mind that our body and our physiology is really geared towards survival and just keeping us safe. And as when we're babies, we're born with some innate fears. One is the fear of falling, and then the other one is the fear of loud noises. And that stays with us because a loud noise 1,000 years ago was probably pretty dangerous. Whereas now our body, we're used to loud noises, we're used to alarm clocks and loud music, but our body is still trained to think that a loud noise is a danger. And so we want to make sure that things that induce anxiety or make us slightly micro traumatized are eliminated, especially from our mornings. And I personally found that waking up to a radio really helped me kind of easily progress out of sleep rather than just jar myself awake out of sleep. It's an awful way to start the day. And I prefer to wake up gradually and be pulled from my slumber. But some other simple tips for lowering stress are wearing blue blocking glasses once it gets dark. You know, there's LED lights everywhere now and fluorescent lighting everywhere now. And it can be really irritating and kind of stressful. And sometimes we don't really realize how stressful it is. So a blue blocking filter can be incredibly helpful for lowering stress. Red light therapy is incredible for lowering stress. It can be really warming and really soothing and really helpful for just recovering after a really long day. And then taking tiny little breaks throughout the day, even if it's just 5 minutes, 10 minutes. It can be an amazing way to kind of refresh, recoup, and get back to the stressful day. Because a lot of times what's going on now is we have a stressful day from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to sleep. And that can be really very hard on our health. So those are kind of my tips. Small breaks throughout the day, red light therapy for 10 to 20 minutes, not waking up with a jarring alarm. I personally like to always take 2 breaks to make a cup of tea or a cup of coffee just to kind of recoup myself and get my mind off my work.
What are your thoughts on eating a soy product like organic miso when you have estrogen dominance? Do you think soy is beneficial for estrogen dominance, or is it something that can make it worse? Because I've heard both opinions, so I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so the research says both. And so that's why some people have one opinion and some people have another. But I'm always looking at from the perspective of our physiology. If we're already overloaded with estrogen, it's kind of like replacing a worse offender with a better offender, but they're still both offenders, in my opinion. And soy can also be very anti-thyroid. And so we have to kind of keep in mind that our thyroid and proper thyroid function is essential for proper detoxification of estrogen. And so it's very important to be pro-thyroid minded when we're eating for hormones. And soy can also be an estrogen, even if it's a phytoestrogen. And a lot of people will say, well, it blocks the hormone receptor at the estrogen receptor. And so it protects us from synthetic estrogens. But in reality, I just don't like putting more estrogen in the body when estrogen is already an issue. But all soy products are different. So we have to look at it in context. A processed food like tofu is very different than a fermented traditional soy product like miso or natto or even soy sauce. Those are very, very, very different products than something like tofu. So everyone's going to react a little differently. But in my opinion, if you're trying to optimize hormones, soy shouldn't be a regular star of the show. If it's a little bit of a condiment, I don't see a problem with it.
So let's say you were to do a mineral test, you work on the diet and so forth, but you still have someone who's not seeing results. What would be the next step?
Usually I'm going to evaluate their environment for electromagnetic fields. So let's say they sleep next to their Wi-Fi router, or they sleep next to a wall that on the other side has a TV or a washer and dryer. Those are things to really consider. Some other things are going to be like mold or a stressful situation at home. So home's not a place of peace. Home is a place of war. And I know that's kind of a dramatic way to say it, but if you're constantly going home and home is not a place to rest and relax, you're in a constant state of stress. I always look at body image. That can be a huge issue. If you feel kind of at war with your body constantly, you're almost in a sense living with the enemy. And so really focusing on body image and how you perceive and think about your body is very important. And then we definitely do dive into gut health. If somebody is really not responding to nutrition, they're getting even more inflamed, nutrient dense foods are irritating them, I don't blame the foods. There's usually a gut issue going on. And so we work on things like hydrochloric acid and digestive enzyme function and pancreatic health, because the pancreas is going to be what makes digestive enzymes for us. And then we're going to focus on sealing and healing the gut with things like gelatin and bone broth. So I'm usually going to focus really heavily into the gut if someone's truly not responding to things like minerals and nutrient dense foods. But usually I am working on the gut conjunctively. So it's very rare that somebody really isn't seeing results with looking at the body holistically and kind of working on it holistically.
I'm a mother to a daughter, and since I have had PCOS, or I have PCOS, I am very worried and concerned about her developing it. She's a little kid. She's only 7 right now, but I wonder about these things. So, what can I do to help her avoid the same path that I had, like the acne, the PMS, the heavy periods, and so forth?
I think the first step, and it's amazing, like what an honor to be able to raise a daughter, and thank you, because you are playing a role in raising the next generation. I truly think it's important for women to be informed about their bodies from the very beginning. I think at least for me, it was true that things like that were hidden from me. You know, periods were hidden from me. They kind of seemed like this scary, intimidating, terrifying, awful thing that I had to deal with. And I think it's important to be empowered around our cycles. So if something is wrong, we know that we can share that and we can get to the bottom of it. When girls first go through puberty, they are going to be very sensitive to estrogens. That's something to kind of keep in mind. It's why a lot of young girls struggle with like heavy periods or irregular cycles, and they are just hypersensitive to estrogen. And so it's very important to make sure that they are not being exposed to tons of chemical products that are endocrine disruptors. I think that's actually one of the most important things, just teaching them the importance of avoiding things like perfumes and lots and lots of chemical and toxin laden hygiene products and cleaning products in their environment can be huge. And then simple things like eating a raw carrot every day. That's something that I plan to instill with any of my children, even if it's a boy or a girl, I don't know, but future children are going to eat a raw carrot every day. And we're going to make that a family tradition, just to bind estrogen and carry it out of the gut. Making sure they're eating a healthy diet and getting rest, and know the importance of sunlight and exercise. I think those are all important things that we can do. But at the end of the day, we can't control what happens to their health. We don't know how genetic PCOS is. We know there is a genetic component. We don't know how genetic it is. We don't know exactly how it's passed down. And so the best we can do is just instill in them healthy habits, help them be as healthy as they possibly can be, both mentally and physically, and then just watch and pray and teach them. And if something is wrong, they will communicate it to us and be open with us about it.
So what are some specific ways that people can work with you? Do you work just online, or do you do any one-on-ones? How does that work?
Yeah, so I do one-on-ones online. All of my coaching is done virtually. I work one-on-one in specific 6-week programs or 12-week programs, and I do everything that I talked about today with clients. I have an online program that is kind of a DIY setup where people take themselves through videos and lessons and modules and get all the resources that they need, called Fully Nourished. And it is actually a prerequisite to working with me, because it just lays down all the fundamentals, all the foundational things I talked about today is laid out in my program, Fully Nourished. And then if people want to take it deeper, they want to dive deeper, that's where I come in, and my one-on-one coaching is available.
And where can everyone find you online? Your website, social media?
Yeah, the best place to find me is jessicaashwellness.com, or my social media handles are all Jessica Ash Wellness, but Instagram is the place to go if you want to learn more, glean information. I do live Q&As every week on Instagram, and then they're posted to YouTube. So if you missed them, you can always go catch up there.
And I just wanted to say, you have beautiful social media. I love it. So aesthetically pleasing, and there's great information.
Thank you. Thank you, Kat.
So let's say someone's on the fence about reaching out to you. They've been trying to do it on their own, but they're not getting where they want to be. What do they need to hear from you so they can finally take that plunge?
Well, I think it's very important for people to feel ready. I know some people are not there yet, whether it's just they're on the fence, or they're not at a place in life where they can devote time and energy towards health. So I'm not someone that really wants to push someone over the edge. I think people know right when they're on the edge. And if they're to a point where they're kind of desperate and they've tried everything else, or they're just so overwhelmed and confused with the information, they just want some clear, realistic, logical information to follow, that's where I come in. I try to be as real and raw. We're not about perfection. I don't really focus on restrictive diets. I'm more, what can we add in? How can we nourish the body more? How can we take burden off the body? How can we instill and flood the body with nutrients and minerals? That's really my goal. And everything else does tend to fall away as you start to follow those principles. So really, if somebody is on the fence about working with me or not, maybe they should give it a little more time until they feel really ready. I have a ton of resources online available that for free, so they can dig through that, and maybe something will spur a thought, or something will really encourage them and push them over the edge and make them feel 100% ready.
Thank you so much again, Jessica, for being with us here today. And you gave us some great information. And yeah, just thanks for coming.
Thank you so much for having me, Kat. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the episode. If you made it this far, I'm sure you found some benefit to the hard work that I put into the show. Show your support by subscribing to the podcast. Leave me a voicemail question, or email me at thehealthfulgypsy@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. be sure to join the Facebook group. You can find all that information in the show notes and my website, katkatibi.com. Have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? When I was trying to get this podcast off the ground, I had a lot of questions. How do I record an episode? How do I get my show into all the apps that people like to listen with? How do I make money from my podcast? The answer to all of these questions is really simple. Anchor. Anchor is a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing your podcast. Best of all, it's 100% free and ridiculously easy to use. And now Anchor can match you with great sponsors who want to advertise on your podcast. That means you can get paid to podcast right away. In fact, that's what I'm doing right now by reading this ad. Anchor's learning curve is virtually none. All you need to do is press a button, start talking, and then distribute to everybody. So if you've always wanted to start your own podcast and make money doing it, go to anchor.fm/start. to join me and a diverse community of podcasters already using Anchor. That's anchor.fm/start. I can't wait to hear your podcast, so send it to me.
This podcast is for informational, merrymakings, and metaphysical purposes only. Statements and views are not medical advice. This podcast, including Kakatibi, disclaim any adverse effects by the use of information you may have heard. Opinions of guests are totally their own. This podcast does not endorse statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications, credibilities, or sanity. Individuals may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to on the podcast. If you think you have a medical problem, consult with a licensed medical physician, not just the spirit of your ancestors while on ayahuasca.